Okay, so we're tonight going to talk about dealing with compassion burnout. How many of you work in some kind of field or volunteer in some kind of field that involves serving others in one way or another? Okay. How many of you feel exhausted by what you're doing? Okay. So I think, all of us really want to be compassionate and kind people. And we like to think of ourselves as compassionate and kind. We certainly don't like to think of ourselves as self-centered and irascible. But we have to, having the correct idea of what compassion is and what kindness is, this is something that isn't always so clear to us. Sometimes we think compassion and kindness is doing what other people want or giving people what they ask for. And superficially, that may seem to be kindness. But if we look deeper, it isn't necessarily. When there's an alcoholic on the street who asks for money, and he's going to use it for booze, is it compassionate to give him the money? I don't think so. So there's many situations where people ask us for help, but where they themselves are not sure of what they actually need to improve the quality of their life. So our compassion, our reaching out to others, has to be very mixed in with wisdom. Because otherwise, if we have what I call Mickey Mouse compassion, where somebody wants something and we give it, they want us to do something and we do it, but we don't stop and assess the situation very well, then what we think may be compassionate may actually not be. And it may in the end be harmful to somebody else. So it's something to really consider, to think about what really is of benefit in this situation. And I say that because many of us grew up with this idea of, you're only a good person if you are running around minding other people's business by making them happy. Do you get what I mean? The person who's always running around nervously taking care of everybody else, except, of course, themselves. And that usually doesn't work so well. And some of us may have been brought up to feel that we're only really compassionate if we ourselves are suffering. Any of you have that kind of idea? That only if you're miserable are you being truly compassionate working for others. This is a big part of the Judeo-Christian tradition in the West. Okay. From a Buddhist viewpoint, that's not so. In Buddhism, we talk about being of benefit to all living beings. So all includes ourself. It isn't everybody minus one, meaning minus myself, It's really talking about being of benefit to all living beings. The idea being that we have to care for ourselves in a proper way to be able to work for the benefit of others in the long term. And so often we don't really know how to take care of ourselves. And so I think a lot of compassion burnout comes because we have kind of a misconstrued idea of compassion, and because we don't really know how to take care of ourselves very well. Because we feel that if we take care of ourselves, then we're being selfish, and that's bad. And so I should just work all out for everybody else until I am flat out, wiped out. And then I can say I'm really kind-hearted and compassionate. And of course, I can't move because I'm exhausted. Okay? Is any of this sounding familiar? Yeah? Okay, so let's look at this thing of compassion burnout and what goes on in our mind that often leads to it. So one thing I think is when we think we're being compassionate, but it's actually what I call personal distress. In other words, somebody else has a problem. I feel so much compassion for them that I myself feel horrible because of their suffering. Yeah. Have you ever had that situation where you're very close to somebody, maybe, or it may be a whole group of people, even across the world, and you just feel their pain so much that you yourself become as if, you're suffering the same thing. Okay? At that point, we may think that we're being compassionate. My heart is so touched by their suffering, and I feel so much pain. That's compassion. But actually, it's personal distress. And the reason I say this is because compassion is the wish to free living beings, ourselves or others, from suffering and misery. Okay? That's all it is the wish to do that. But when we start feeling others' pain so much that we hurt, is our mind still focused on others, or is our mind now focused on our own pain and misery? You getting what I'm saying? We've kind of lost. Others were there at the beginning, and we cared about their suffering. But then it quickly turned into, I ache so much because of their suffering. I can't stand to see them suffer. And at that point, when we are saying, I can't stand to see them suffer in that way, then the focus has shifted away from them to ourselves. Yeah, I hurt too much by watching them. And I think this is what often leads us to put down our pets, or to consider what's called mercy killing, because we can't endure seeing somebody else's suffering. So we say, I'm putting them out of their misery. But what's really happening is we want to stop our own misery because it's so painful for us to see them suffer. Okay? From a Buddhist viewpoint, we do our best to eliminate somebody else's suffering, but mercy killing is not part of the recipe to do that. It was quite interesting. Our two cats died at different times the last year. And both times we had retreats going on at the monastery. There were a number of people there. And one of the cats just died in the dining room. He wanted to be there around everybody else. And his death actually became a part of the retreat. And I remember when we were talking about it on the last day, somebody at the retreat brought up the point that, many people would have put their cat down a long time beforehand. And it was so odd for me because that thought never entered my mind of putting him down. It's like, this is what he's going through. We make him as comfortable as we can. We love him. We were doing prayers and mantra and being as much benefit as we could. And he died. Yeah. And I think he had a good death, actually. Much better than if we had put him down in a vet's office where he would have been very afraid. But in any case, what I'm getting at by this is that so often our our compassion fatigue comes from feeling personal distress rather than actual compassion. So we have to really check, and always come back to our motivation. What really is my motivation? What really is important here? Okay? So I think the personal distress is one thing that causes compassion burnout, because, how much can we endure personal distress? Not too long. Okay? So the way to remedy that, I think, is, well, first of all, before I get to the way to remedy it, because all these things are really intertwined, let's look at some other things that cause compassion fatigue. Another one is when we take responsibility for things that are not our responsibility. Okay? So, while others are suffering, of course we do our best out of a kind heart to alleviate their suffering. That's fine. But when we feel inside that I am responsible for eliminating their suffering, and then we get really involved in doing this, that, and the other thing to try and eliminate their suffering, and we're running around, feeling like, I've got to stop their suffering. Again, we've lost the real sense of compassion because we've taken responsibility for something that isn't our responsibility. Okay? In the sense that I think in compassion, our responsibility is not to be Mr. or Ms. Fix-It. Yeah. Our responsibility is to alleviate suffering in a skillful way as best as we can, but without being Mr. or Ms. Fix-It. Yeah. Do you know Mr. or Ms. Fix-It? Do you have part of them residing inside you? I've got to fix everybody else's problems. Yeah? My spouse has problems. I got to get involved in their thing and fix their problems. My kids have problems. I've got to fix my kids' problems. My parents have problems. I've got to fix their problems. So we're running around trying to fix everybody else's problems without even asking the other people if they want our help, or if our help is actually help, or if we're getting on their nerves. Because sometimes when we say, I'm trying to help them out of their suffering, we're saying this, I'm trying to help them out of their suffering. But what's really going on is, I'm trying to make them be what I want them to be. Are you getting what I mean? Yeah. Somebody has a problem, and, gee, I really care about this person, but I can't stand them when they're like this. Yeah. And they're just being irresponsible, and they're going to make a mess of their life, or they won't be able to get a job, or they'll flunk out of school, or this, that, and the other thing, So I've got to control them for their own benefit. Right? Right? Yeah, we're doing this with so much compassion. Because we don't want them to mess up their own lives just because they're irresponsible and idiots and don't know the right way to live their life like we know. Yeah. And so, in the name of compassion, what we're often trying to do is control other people. And this happens a lot in our families. Don't you think? Hello out there. You guys are not responding. Yeah? I need some feedback from an audience to know that I'm not talking Chinese and that you're hearing me. Okay? So, the mind that in the name of compassion is actually trying to control other living beings. And then, of course, we feel exhausted from that, and we feel discouraged because we have so much good advice that other people really need to take and follow in order to live their lives in a healthy, happy way. And they're such dimwits that they aren't doing it. So I've got to just keep trying and pushing them and nagging them and coercing them and getting on their nerves, all in the name of because I care about you so much. Yeah, that's not compassion, is it? But that's often what we do, and then when other people are not doing what we want them to do, when they are not living their life according to our sage's advice, then we feel so discouraged. Look at everything I've done to try and help you, and you're still doing this. Don't you realize how much I love you? Okay. I think they also call it codependence. Okay. Activism? So, we have to really, again, come back. What is my motivation? Yeah. Inside, am I really trying to help somebody, or am I trying to mold them so that they become what I want them to become? Because those are two very, very different things. Okay? And so also, involved in this is this thing of really being Mr. or Ms. Fix-It. Yeah. I'll go out, you can't find a job, I'll go out and look for jobs for you. Yeah. You have a hangover, you can't go to work today, I'll call in for you. I mean, this is classic codependence, isn't it? Okay. But it's all happening in the name of being compassionate. But meanwhile, what we're doing is building up resentment. Because we're trying to make them be somebody, and they're not being it. And we get really resentful, and then at some point we just go, I can't stand it anymore. Okay? So these kinds of things, the personal distress, taking responsibility for what isn't our responsibility, controlling people, being Mr. and Ms. Fix-It, all of these things can masquerade as compassion, but they're not. Okay. So I think when we actually have compassion, we're seeing suffering and we want very much to eliminate it. But we also are aware, we have a big picture of what's really going on. And we realize that the causes of suffering are very, very complex. The causes of suffering are not simple. And so it's not something that we as one person can necessarily go around and fix, because we can't control all the things that are the causes and condition of somebody else's suffering. Often, what we can do is help somebody learn how to help themselves. Okay? Teach them the skills, empower them to feel like they can do something to correct their own situation. But again, often in the names of compassion, we think we'll just do it for them, it's easier. But that doesn't work, you know. It's just really giving people the skills so that they can make wise decisions themselves. And to realize that people have to want to learn. Yeah. If they don't want to learn, if they don't really want to change their situation, then all of our running around becomes what my mother used to call knocking your head against the wall. Okay. My mom used to say, don't knock your head against the wall. It's good advice, isn't it? Yeah. Because you're not going to get through the wall. So, you know, of course it depends on who you're trying to help. You know, helping a child, you know, a 5-year-old, is very different than helping a 15-year-old or helping a 25-year-old or a 35-year-old or your 45-year-old who still hasn't moved out of the house. Yeah. So having compassion for each of them is, you know, going to, you know, come about in a slightly different way. But they all share the trait of really seeing what somebody's skills and abilities are and meeting them where they're at so that they can learn ways to help themselves. And very often in situations, somebody does not want to learn the skills to help themselves until they hit rock bottom. I work with inmates, and several of them have told me, especially the ones who had very severe drug and alcohol problems, that they went to this rehab and that therapy and afterwards went out and got loaded because they didn't really want to change at that point. And they told me that only when they really hit bottom, that then they figured out, my life is not working when I'm drinking and drugging, and I have to change. And then they really started to change. So sometimes, if you're working with somebody who has a substance abuse problem, or any kind of addiction problem, some of our addictions are illegal, some of them are legal. Some of our addictions are called being a good citizen. Yeah, being a workaholic for a legal business or a semi-legal business. You know, like banking. You know, that's called being, that's good. Okay. And then some people have, you know, are workaholics for their drug trade. Okay. That's called bad. They both are very good entrepreneurs. Very interesting, you know. Good skills used in the wrong way. But so all these addictions are the same, but or have some similar qualities. But until somebody really hits the bottom with it, and, they often aren't fully motivated to change. And so sometimes the compassionate thing is to step back. If somebody, we're trying to help somebody and they're very resistant, then to realize, hey, I can't control anybody. They're an adult. They've got to learn for themselves. And my job at this moment is to manage my own feelings of distress at seeing somebody I love sink to the bottom. But I can't do anything about it at this particular point in time. So we keep the door open. We work on ourselves to keep our own selves healthy and our own heart open. And then we have to let go until somebody really gets to that point in their life where they say, what I'm doing isn't working and I have to change. And then when they get there, if we've kept the door open, then there's the chance to really be beneficial to them. But again, not by rescuing them, but by giving them the skills that they need to help themselves. Because this whole dynamic that we so often get into of rescuing other people really doesn't work, does it? Somebody described this thing called the drama triangle. Any of you heard of this? Drama triangle. It's very interesting. Okay, so it describes a lot of our human relationships. So there's 3 roles. Yeah, there's the victim, the person who's being mistreated. Yeah. There's the perpetrator who's making the victim miserable. And then there's the rescuer who saves the victim. Okay? Looks all very nice, right? Perpetrator is bad. Victim, you feel sorry for. Rescuer is good. No, it's not like that. Because often when we really study human relationships, we find that within, let's say, a family or, friendships or whatever, people will change roles. And somebody may be the perpetrator, making their partner really miserable, criticizing them or beating up on them or mistreating them. Okay? But the victim in some way is getting something out of it. Yeah. You can get a lot of mileage being a victim. Yeah. You ever noticed that? Any of you victims? Yeah. We especially nowadays, there's so much attention on, you're a victim, somebody did that to you. We can get a lot of mileage out of being a victim. We can make a whole personal identity out of being a victim. A whole personal image, our image of ourselves is, I am a victim of whatever happened in my childhood, of this or that or the other thing, and becoming a victim. We can get a lot of mileage. And then the rescuer steps in and saves us. But then what often happens is the victim becomes the perpetrator and makes the rescuer miserable. Yeah? And then the former perpetrator comes in and becomes the rescuer to save the new victim who used to be the rescuer. In other words, what I'm getting at is these roles of victim, perpetrator, and rescuer are very loose, and they change in different situations. Okay? And so we often get our wrong notion of compassion tangled up in this kind of dynamic. Yeah. I'm going to rescue somebody because I'm so compassionate. And then the victim takes advantage of us. And then we get angry, and we become the perpetrator of the victim, who was our perpetrator. The perpetrator making us miserable after we help them. You getting what I mean? Yeah. So it gets very complex, but what I'm getting at is that all this happens because our minds are not very clear, and we're not operating from a clean, clear, compassionate motivation that has the big picture. Instead, we're operating out of fanciful ideas of compassion, out of wanting to think of ourselves as a good person, or of needing to be needed. Yeah, we rescue other people because we need to be needed. So it all gets very sticky, and that's why a lot of our compassion doesn't work, and why we suffer from compassion fatigue. Okay? So here I've been mostly talking about impersonal relationships. What about somebody who's working, let's say, as a medical professional in medicine, or as a teacher, or as a social worker, or an activist, or whatever, where it's really your job that you've chosen to help, and you're giving and giving and giving, and then at the end feeling fatigued by it. Again, I think that the key here is to have the big picture and to see that eliminating suffering is not some quick, cheap, easy thing. That it depends on multifaceted approach, and also from a Buddhist viewpoint. In our world, we are never going to have heaven on earth because we all have ignorance, anger, and attachment. And as long as our minds are filled with ignorance, anger, and attachment, suffering is going to exist. Okay? That's the reality of the situation. So if we see things that way, then we recognize that the real way to help people is to help them eliminate their ignorance, anger, and attachment. Because it's through those, what we call the three poisonous attitudes, that we do the deeds that get us all tangled up in a lot of suffering. Okay? That's the best way to cure that. That doesn't mean we don't help people in a temporal way if somebody's hungry or thirsty or they're stuck in the snow or whatever. Yes, of course, we help. But to see that as long as there's ignorance, anger, and attachment, there's going to be suffering. And so, in a way, that takes our very lightheaded idealism out of compassion and makes us a lot more pragmatic. Yeah, a lot more down to earth. I do everything I can to eliminate suffering, but I also know that it's not going to happen immediately. And I may eliminate one kind of suffering, but of one person, or even of a group of people. But that doesn't mean that all of their suffering is going to be eliminated. And so we have that picture and we accept that situation. So we work to do whatever we can, but we're also very realistic about what the outcome is. Because I think a lot of our burnout comes because we have a very idealistic vision of the outcome. And as long as we are living beings with afflicted states of mind, our idealized vision is not going to happen. It's not going to come about. Okay? But that doesn't mean we just throw in the towel and give up. Because, suffering is suffering. It doesn't matter whose it is, ours or somebody else's. It hurts, and we do what we can to eliminate it. Okay? But with some kind of realistic approach. In this, we have to take care of ourselves. And so we have to get rid of that idea that I'm only truly helping if I'm miserable. Yeah, that's not true. We have to learn how to balance ourselves. We have to learn how to keep ourselves healthy. Because if we don't do that, how are we going to benefit anybody? Then we're going to become the one that they're going to have to take care of because we've neglected to take care of ourselves. Okay? So we can stretch ourselves physically sometimes to do things that are really important, but to also make sure we take care of our physical health. Yeah. To take care that we keep our mind balanced. That we don't get so gung-ho about saving everybody else, thinking that we're God, that we get burnt out. But instead we keep ourselves balanced, and we do what we're capable of doing, and then take time to rest. And when we're not capable of doing something, to be very clear about it, and see if somebody else will step up to the plate and do it at that moment, and not feel guilty about it. Because we're only human beings, and if we take care of ourselves, in the long run, we'll be able to take care of other people much better. Okay? So taking care of ourselves is very different than being self-indulgent. Yeah. And often we don't see the difference, and so we get very confused. We think that taking care of ourselves is just being selfish and self-indulgent. Self-indulgent is, when you really don't care what's happening with anybody else, and just this incredible greediness about our own pleasure. That's self-indulgent. But keeping ourselves balanced, keeping ourselves mentally and physically healthy, that's not self-indulgent. That's being practical. It's not selfish. Okay, then I'll open it up for questions soon, but I wanted to talk also about what about situations where there's suffering, you feel compassion, but there's really nothing you can do in that situation. Either the person doesn't want the help, or we don't have the skills to be able to do it, or the situation is such that the suffering is halfway around the world and we can't go there and help, or the situation is so dire, somebody has a terminal illness that's not reversible. So, what can we do in those situations where giving direct, immediate assistance doesn't really work? We don't want to just tune it out and say, well, there's nothing I can do, so I'm going to the movies. Okay? Because that makes our heart kind of cold. We don't want to have a cold heart. There's a very wonderful meditation in Buddhism called the Taking and Giving meditation. In Tibetan, it's Tonglen. Okay, taking and giving. And in this meditation, we're doing the opposite of what we usually do, of what the selfish mind does. Okay. What our selfish mind does is, if there's a problem, you can have it. If there's something good, I'll take it. Right? Yeah? If there's some suffering, you have it. If there's some pleasure, I'll take it. So this is our usual MO. Yeah. Although we, paint it over and try and look good in front of everybody, but, under the surface. This is what's really going on. Okay, so in this meditation, we do the opposite of what that self-centered mind wants. We change the attitude. Yeah. So that if there's suffering, I'll take it. And if there's happiness, you have it. Okay. And we do this by familiarizing ourselves with some previous meditations. Some of them being such things like equanimity, seeing that everybody wants happiness, wants to be free of suffering. Equally, it's not that our happiness is more important, it's not that our suffering hurts more, but we're all equal in this regard. Also another meditation where we meditate on the kindness of others and really see that we have been the recipient of a tremendous amount of kindness in our lives, and so wanting to repay that. So there's a series of meditations that we do to get ourselves to the point where we really see others as being as important as ourselves. Okay? And then we even go a step further than that and see the disadvantages of our own self-centeredness and the benefits that accrue from cherishing others. So that we actually want to exchange who we cherish. You know, when you're a very deep spiritual practitioner, okay, I am not at this level, but I can understand how some people can get there. Yeah. Then the mind cherishes other living beings so much that helping them is what you want to do more than helping yourself. So it's not this sacrificial thing I was talking about, look at everything I've done to you, why aren't you following my advice? Yeah, it's not that, but it's an actual, genuine, heartfelt feeling. I think that sometimes parents have towards their kids. When you would, especially when your child's very young, you would really go out of your way to do anything to help that kid. Yeah. You get up in the middle of the night a few times for years to help that child. And you don't, look at the kid the next morning and say, I didn't get a good night's sleep because you were crying all night. You don't do that. You do it happily because you really, really cherish that little baby. Okay? So it's the same way of having that kind of feeling towards other living beings, even when they're not babies and cute and adorable and under our power. But, having that same kind of affection and compassion and love for them, that, their happiness is as important as mine to me. Yeah. So that giving up something of myself for their happiness is not a big sacrifice. It's something that just flows in a very natural way. And in a similar way, eliminating their suffering is as important to us as eliminating our own suffering. There's not a big gap between self and others. Okay. So when we have that kind of mind, then this taking and giving meditation becomes really vibrant. Even if we don't have that mind yet, but we admire that mental state that cherishes others more than self in a really healthy way, then doing this meditation of taking and giving can be very, very wonderful, And in it, what we do is we think of one person or a group of people who are suffering in some way. And with compassion, we think, I want to take on I want to take their suffering away from them. Okay? Not because I'm the big misfix-it, not because I want status and glory, but just because I really sincerely want them to be free of this. And so we imagine their suffering coming out of them in the form of like pollution, some kind of really disgusting something, yeah? And we, as this is coming out of them, we think that they're being freed of that suffering. And then we take on that pollution. But we don't just take it and then sit there choking ourselves because of it. But we take what other living beings don't want, which is their suffering, and we use it to destroy what we don't want, which is our own self-centeredness. So we imagine our own self-centeredness like this very hard lump at our heart in the middle of our chest. Yeah. You know how when you're really feeling self-protective and or some strong, it's like, ah. Okay? So we're taking their suffering, which they don't want, using it to transform into a lightning bolt that then strikes this lump of our own self-centeredness, which is what we don't want, and completely shatters it. Or if instead of the image of a lightning bolt and a rock, you want to use the image of, some very strong soap cleansing, something very dirty, some kind of image like this, where others' suffering is being used as an antidote to destroy our own self-centeredness. And when that lump at our heart has been destroyed, then there's just open space in our heart. And in the meditation, we sit there in this open space, which is really nice. Yeah? Because our own self-centeredness keeps us so miserable and tight. And when we think that it's been destroyed, then there's just a lot of open space in our heart. And then within that open space, we imagine light and we radiate that light out. We send that light out to whoever it was or the whole group of people whose suffering we took on. And we imagine that as we send this light out, that we are giving them our body, multiplying our body so that it multiplies and transforms and becomes what others need. That we're giving them our possessions, that again our possessions multiply and transform and we give them to other beings, and that we even give them our merit or our own virtue, with a happy mind. And as we give these things to them, then we imagine that they receive them and that they're feeling very content and very peaceful and that their afflictions have been eliminated, and including their own ignorance, anger, and attachment. And that all their needs have been fulfilled, including their spiritual needs that are really what's going to be what really frees their heart. Okay? So this taking and giving meditation is a very good way to stay connected to people when there isn't the opportunity to actually be physically involved in remedying their pain and their misery. Okay? Because we keep connected, we're cultivating love and compassion. And that is helping us, because then when we actually have the opportunity in front of us to do something for somebody, we won't hesitate, because we will already be very well practiced in seeing the disadvantages of self-centeredness and the benefits of cherishing others. Okay? So that's a little bit I'm seeding some ideas about compassion burnout and how to prevent it or cure it. but still remain connected and not just get so cold and aloof that, because we're so used to seeing some suffering that, oh, well, what's another person dead? That doesn't matter. Like we often become jaded like that from watching television, and watching movies where, they've done studies. How many people do children see die on TV each day? And it just breeds in them the thing of, well, it doesn't matter. But it does matter. Okay. So what I'd like to do now is open it up, and maybe you have some questions or comments, and we can have a bit of a discussion, and you can bring up some of the points that most interest you or that you're most curious about. Yeah.
I'm kind of interested in, sort of virtual compassion, meaning like the world situation that we're always learning about, hearing about, like with climate change, things like that, where you see something that's very wrong on a very large scale and feel kind of powerless about it.
Mm-hmm.
Last night there was a woman here, an author, talking about a book that she wrote 5 years ago on climate change and sort of updating it. And it was really interesting discussion. I mean, we learned a lot. We talked about ocean acidification, which I didn't know about, and lots of stuff. The interesting thing to me was after her lecture, and it went to question and answer, people kept asking her, like, what can you do about this kind of situation? Like looking for the answers. And she was very honest, and she did, somebody who does this full time, has worked for the New Yorker and won prizes. This book is, won a prize. And she was just like, I don't know. And I started thinking, a lot of my thinking, we're really good about identifying problems, especially on a big scale like that. We're really good, but we seem so ill-equipped to come up with the solutions. And I'm, to me, there's something there, some phenomenon that has something to do with compassion at that scale.
Mm-hmm.
We're missing something, and it's like, and the only thing, while you were talking, I was thinking, part of the problem is you see it at that scale, but the solutions involve individual suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what, going out driving my car, or not, what I mean? Like, the solutions come down to things that people see as causes for their suffering. So there's that immediate sort of individual suffering. So I don't know, I haven't really thought this through, I'm still working on it, but there's some kind of compassion disconnect from one scale to the next.
Uh-huh. Okay, so you're saying that we may have a lot of compassion for climate change and the devastation it's wreaking on our planet, but when it comes to ourselves not being able, thinking that I can't just get in my car and drive it when I want to, that,
then it becomes easier to say,
yeah, well, what the heck, yeah. Yeah. Well, it was very interesting for me. Some years ago, I was in one town, and I was having lunch with some people who were ecologists at the local university. And so we were talking about ecology and climate change and all of this stuff. And then they said to me, these are two professional professors in ecology and environment. And they told me that one day their kids came home. Their kids were maybe, 8, 10 years old, something, 6. Came home and said, Mom and Dad, we really need to recycle because it's good for the planet if we recycle. And we aren't recycling. And the parents were telling me they were so surprised. Because as much as they cared about the environment and talked about it, they never brought it home to be something that was involved with their life. It was always this big problem that society needs to solve, or the government needs to solve, or somebody out there needs to do something. But I throw all my trash in the garbage and I don't think about it. And I drive wherever I want and don't think about it. Yeah? And I think that's the disconnect. Yeah? That we're thinking we're making ourselves powerless as an individual. And we don't really want to give up our pleasure. That's bottom line. You know, there's climate change, there's this problem, there's that problem. You know, there's unequal distribution of wealth, there's homelessness, but I don't want to give up my comfort. I don't want to have any inconvenience, especially as Americans, because we think that we're the one superpower, so we should get everything that we want. Even personally, not just as a country, but personally, there's this sense of entitlement, you know, that I shouldn't have to give up anything in order to equalize wealth, or in order to remedy climate change, or in order to help the homeless in my own town. Okay? And so this, you know, when we see this, we see how deeply rooted our own self-centeredness is. Yeah. This is not saying we're bad people, because we are not our self-centeredness. Okay? Our self-centeredness is not our basic human nature. It's some extra added garbage. Yeah. But it's very deeply rooted. And when we really get immersed in spiritual practice, then we begin to see that our self-centeredness is not what keeps us safe and happy and secure and protected, but our self-centeredness actually is our enemy that causes a lot of our own problems. And when we can get very, very clear on that, and that takes a lot of really deep inner work, then we don't mind being inconvenienced. We don't mind giving something up. Because we see that this self-centered attitude that's always thinking me, I, my, and mine is actually the source of our own misery. Yeah. And it's hard to see that because we feel if I don't take care of myself, yeah, then nobody else will. And we get it all kind of screwed up in this way. Yeah? Like, oh, I have to be comfortable and I have to have what I want and I. And that putting so much emphasis on ourself makes us super sensitive so that we actually experience more pain, are more easily offended, you know, feel picked on more, feel unappreciated more, you know. So why do we get into these states of self-pity? It's because of our self-centeredness. It's not so much because other people don't love us and other people don't appreciate us. It's because we've become so self-centered that every small thing that happens to us is completely blown out of proportion and taken extremely personally in a way that makes us quite miserable. So when we really start seeing this again and again and again in our lives, then we begin to see that self-centeredness is what makes us unhappy, and then we become much more willing to give it up. Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? You know, when we think of giving something up for somebody else's benefit, it feels like, oh, this is going to be so painful. Yeah? If I don't get this last piece of pizza, you know, I'm going to be in so much pain. Yeah. But actually, if we don't get that last piece of pizza, by the next day we don't even remember it. And we didn't really suffer that much. And if we train our mind to take delight in other people's happiness, then you gave the piece of pizza to someone else, and you feel happy just being able to do that. And that gives you more happiness than eating the pizza. Because the pizza only lasts, how long does it take you to eat a piece of pizza? Not very long. Yeah. But the delight in sharing becomes a longer term happiness. Yeah. Uh-huh. Ah, yes. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have to discriminate a couple of things here. There's optimism and there's unrealistic expectations. And they're not the same thing. Okay? So unrealistic expectations get us all tangled up and confused. What you're talking about is when you give up your unrealistic expectations, then you go overboard and give up your optimism. But unrealistic expectations and optimism are different. Okay, give up the unrealistic expectations, but remain optimistic. And similarly, being pessimistic and being realistic, you're thinking of getting them confused. In other words, if I give up my unrealistic expectation, I'm going to be pessimistic because that's being realistic. Okay. But again, being realistic and being pessimistic are very, very different. Okay? Because your mental state is different. Yeah, when you're pessimistic, then there's no chance at all for anything good to happen. And in fact, you're so sure everything is going to go wrong that if it doesn't, you make it go wrong. Yeah. Whereas, being realistic that yes, problems happen. Yes, as soon as we have a plan, we know what's not going to happen. Then you know that, and then you can play with the situation a little bit more. It's like, oh yeah, there's going to be problems, and they aren't going to schedule themselves. And I don't know when they're going to happen, and they're definitely not going to be the problems I expected. But you can have some sense of humor about it, and some lightheartedness, and some optimism of, yeah, things are going to happen, and let's see how I can deal with them. Yeah? Yeah?
What I wanted to ask you is, thank you for coming here and talking to us. I'm Jewish, therefore I'm pessimistic.
Oh yeah, I am too. And you're persecuted?
Well, no, that's not where I'm going with this.
Oh.
So in what you're saying tonight, that loving kindness and compassion, yes, we're all over that too. But I and Judaism in general doesn't believe in an end to suffering.
Mm-hmm.
We just think it's part of life. And of course we try to help and give the world. But we don't have that belief that it can end suffering. And I'm curious if that is part of what Judaism from a Jewish life, or if it was meeting particular teachers, or these are two cultures that have been all been destroyed earlier in the
Yeah. Of what drew me to
What do you
to Buddhism.
teaching instead of mystical or part spiritual side of Buddhism?
Okay. What drew me is that it made sense. And Buddhism made a lot of sense. And also when I practiced it, it helped me. It was very practical. And in particular, some of the teachings that really drew me, that made sense, were when my teachers explained how ignorance, anger, and attachment are the root of suffering. You know, when I really looked at that, it was like, oh yeah, my suffering doesn't come from outside. My suffering is rooted in my own afflicted mental states. Yeah. And that was a big shift for me, because if my suffering is rooted in here, then I can't go around feeling sorry for myself. I can't go around blaming everybody else for my problems. Okay. So that meant there's something that I can do. And what also drew me to Buddhism is that there was a path, a step-by-step path about how to train your mind so that you transform these afflicted mental states into beneficial and realistic mental states. And there was an actual step-by-step meditation practice to do. Think about this, then think about this, then think about this, you know? So it wasn't just love thy neighbor as thyself, which sounds great, but who does it? And who even knows how to do it? You know, we all learned that as a kid. Did anybody tell you how to love the other kid who threw sand at you? They just said, love it, but also slug it. Yeah, don't let him take advantage of you. But nobody, you know, there was no technique for how do you love people who you don't like, or who you disagree with, or who harm you, or who are strangers. Yeah. And that's something that I really found in Buddhism was, a way to look at things so that I could really open my heart to other people in a very realistic way. Yeah. So that drew me a lot. And then, you know, when I practiced it, when I put the teachings and the meditations into practice, they really helped me. Yeah. So you can't knock something that helps you be happier or be a better person, can you? So I just kept doing it. Any other questions? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And simply dismiss that. And then, okay, well maybe we need to be more compassionate. So then now it's more evolved. That's their process. Let them go with their process. That's what they need to do. And I think for myself, personally speaking, it's really important to open my heart up, feel that empathy, allow that pain and that suffering, and to really connect with it. And I worry that by maintaining the mindset of, that's their responsibility, it's not my place, it's not my role. Mm-hmm. I don't want to go too far, to one extreme or the other. I'm just curious, how do we balance both of those?
Okay. So you're saying that when I was talking about us taking responsibility for things that aren't our responsibility, that you were saying that you see yourself as a more callous person. So if you adopt that attitude, that's just going to reinforce your feeling of, well, I don't need to get involved with them, and you're seeing that that's not really the path you want to go down. You want to be involved with others. You want to really be more connected with them and more caring towards them. Yeah. And so how do you separate that out of that's their responsibility, this is my responsibility, but still have a heart that's connected? Yeah. I think that, there's a few ways to do it, I think. Yeah. One is to see that we're all alike in many, many ways. Yeah. And so when we see somebody else suffering, that may be their responsibility, but I have that same suffering inside me. And I have my own dysfunctional ways of causing my own suffering. Yeah? And so being aware of that so that we all know what our own suffering feels like. And so when we see others suffering, say, I know what that feels like. This is not a foreign experience. I don't need to block it out. But I don't need to get so overwhelmed by it that I fall into personal distress. Or block it out saying, oh, well, that's their responsibility. As long as I'm okay, it doesn't matter. But it's like we really see that ourselves and others are not so different. And one situation that I come back to a lot in this is the whole Rodney King thing that happened many years ago. And in seeing like the suffering of all the different people the cops were suffering and King was suffering and the Korean grocers were suffering and the rest of the country watching the whole thing was suffering. And to realize that I had bits of all those different people inside me. And that if I had been brought up like Rodney King, I would have probably done what he did. If I had been brought up like those cops were, I would have done like what they did. If I had been brought up like the grocers, I would have done what they did. And to realize, I am not so different from other people. And whatever suffering they have or whatever crazy afflictive mental states they have, I also have. So there's not this big separation between me and them. It's not, oh, well, that's your responsibility, too bad. It's like, I understand what you're doing because I do that. Yeah. And I see how much I can see how much when you do that it hurts you. And so that helps me to see how much when I do that it hurts me. And I can have compassion for both of us. Yeah. Because we are all pretty much the same, aren't we? Yeah. In many ways, inside. Very much the same. So I think that's one way to really do it. And the other way is this meditation, contemplating the kindness of others. I think this meditation is incredibly important, and we should really do it very regularly, because the more we meditate on the kindness that we've received from others, it completely transforms our whole worldview, and we stop feeling like victims, and we start seeing, wow, I've been the recipient of so much kindness. And it's just mind-blowing. And when you see that, then your heart opens. It can't not open. Okay. Yeah. sure. Yeah. The giving and taking meditation can be quite scary when you first hear it. Yeah. And if it's scary, that means that we're identifying our self-centeredness. Yeah. But it's so important when we do it to really see that we're taking what other people don't want and using it to destroy what we don't want. Their suffering is destroying our self-centeredness. And when you can really get that clear, then the meditation makes a lot more sense. And I know in times when I've had a lot of physical or mental suffering, when I've done this meditation, it's helped tremendously. You know? Which is the opposite, because you think, oh, I'm taking on other beings' suffering. Yeah. But when you use it to destroy your own self-centeredness, then it changes your own personal situation dramatically.
Maybe some of the meditations we'll be working on this weekend.
Yes. Yeah, we'll be doing some of these meditations this weekend. Yeah. Okay. So I think heaven on earth is actually possible. I think the total elimination of suffering is definitely possible. That it will happen in a world where we are afflicted by ignorance, anger, and attachment? No. Okay? But I don't see that us, who we are now, as being all that we ever will be. Yeah. And I don't think planet Earth is the only place where there's living beings. Yeah. So I have a much more expansive vision of the universe. And I do think, in Buddhist terms, we call it awakening or enlightenment. It comes through inner transformation. Yeah. And it's definitely possible, and people have attained it. Okay. But, if we're trying to fix all of our problems externally to make a heaven on earth, no, because you can't legislate generosity. Can you? And you can't legislate ethical conduct, and you can't legislate fortitude. These are personal qualities that we have to develop inside of our own minds. So we'll dedicate for this evening, and then we will resume tomorrow morning. So let's just take a couple of minutes. I call it Digestion Meditation. Okay. And so think about something that you heard this evening so that you can take it home with you and use it. And then let's rejoice that we were able to spend the evening together in this way, and rejoice at the individual and collective positive energy we all created in doing so. And then let's give that virtue away, give that positive energy away. Imagining it radiating from our heart as light that goes out in all directions. And thinking that may it ripen in the well-being and long-term happiness and elimination of all suffering through eliminating all ignorance, anger, and attachment for each and every living being. Okay. Good.